What's cracking, peeps? Darren McDuffie here, alias Fat Man, helping you become perfectly healthy and toned and conscious, of course. So, tonight we're just talking about healthy foods, and you may be wondering why I have these foods listed around me: soy, corn, milk, eggs, and wheat. So we'll get into that a little bit later, but the thing that I want to discuss tonight is just healthy foods and why there are really no healthy foods. If you are familiar with allergies, everybody knows someone who has probably bad allergies. They're out in the environment and they have an allergy attack or something, or you maybe even known someone who's had allergy shots. But when it comes to food, you can have food allergies and you can also have food sensitivities. A food allergy, perhaps I know when I was in elementary school, we had a person that was in my class who immediately when they drank any type of milk, they broke out. They really had an immediate reaction to the milk. In that case, it's a food allergy. When you have that immediate reaction to a food allergy, a lot of us have something we will call food intolerances or food sensitivities. These things tend to crop up over 48 to 72 hours. So we really don't, we're not realizing the foods that we're eating because we've eaten them 2 days or 3 days before, and then we may get a rash. Then we may start coughing. Then we may start getting that runny nose. So that's the difference in a food allergy and a food sensitivity. Now, what's the danger in all of this? Many people don't know how good they can feel when they start to pull foods out of their diets. And these foods, because they're not agreeing with you, so to speak, and I can get into all the terminology or what needs to be tested, but I want to keep it at a simplified level. So when you are eating these foods that aren't agreeing with you, these foods that you are sensitive to, what it's doing is putting a burden on your immune system. So when you lift those foods off, you'll notice that you have a lot more sensitivity to the stuff that you're eating. No pun intended. You'll start to realize that the foods that you're taking out of your diet, you have become extremely sensitive to them because you didn't notice them before because your immune system was so suppressed. So many people don't know that their immune system is located within their intestines. And if you're constantly eating food, that's why you're getting the digestive issues. If you're constantly eating food that you're sensitive to, again, it suppresses your immune system. And what's the danger of that? Your immune system is that force field, that thing that keeps you from getting sick. And if your immune system is constantly fighting off foods that you're eating that don't agree with you, then it can't fight off the things that really it needs to fight off, viruses and bacteria. So it's fighting off these things that are called foods, and then it's trying to fight off the virus and the bacteria, which is what it's really made for. And all the while, you may be noticing that you might become sicker and sicker because your immune system is working overtime. Now, what I have on the screen is the 5 most common food sensitivities that people have. The first one being soy. We've been told that soy is a health food. It's not really a health food. You can go back and there's a really good book out about soy, and I interviewed the person on my show when we talked a lot about soy. And sorry, I can't remember the name right offhand right now, but I'll find that and share that on this Facebook Live in the comments below. The other one is corn. For me, I'm sensitive to corn. I use a lot of gluten-free products are made of corn, and a lot of gluten-free products are made of corn. I'm sorry, my phone was just going off. But a lot of gluten-free products are made of corn. And the more we eat things over and over again, the more we will develop a sensitive to them. So if you're replacing products containing gluten with corn products that are gluten-free, chances are over time you're going to develop a sensitivity to it just because you're eating it all the time. Another one is milk. A lot of people are sensitive to milk. And I can tell you from my own experience, as I became probably about 25 years of age, I could no longer drink milk. I think there's a subset of people, African Americans and Jewish, those people who are Jewish, really have problems with dairy, would really have problems with milk. So you want to watch out for these types of products. If you're going to drink milk, chances are you're going to really gear yourself towards milk. But if you want to pull milk out of your diet and never drink milk again, that's not really a hard thing to do. It's not really a challenge because there's so many milk substitutes now. You have almond milk, you have cashew milk, you have hemp milk. You have all these different things that you can use. And for a while, I was always afraid to pull milk out of my diet just simply because I was a cereal eater. I grew up on cereal, on the high sugary cereals, cornflakes and Dig-'em Smacks and Fruit Loops. So I was always afraid to pull milk out of my diet. But going through all the digestive issues that I was going through, at 25 years of age, I decided to pull milk out of my diet. And I really wasn't that versed in food sensitivities or anything. I just know that milk caused me a lot of bloating and milk caused me a lot of gas. The next thing is eggs. I've seen a lot of people that are sensitive to eggs. They're sensitive to animal proteins, especially chicken eggs. The proteins within the chicken eggs, a lot of people can't digest them. So the thing that you want to remember about eggs is that a lot of eggs are not the best eggs for people to be eating. You want to be eating the pasture-raised eggs. You want to be eating the best eggs that you can eat. If you can't afford those eggs, I would say probably just get the best thing that you can probably afford and just go with that. But again, a lot of people are sensitive to eggs. If you are sensitive to eggs, one thing you can do is you can substitute chicken eggs for duck eggs. I used to work in a food sensitivity testing lab, and I saw, again, a lot of people that were sensitive to eggs. And I've seen where, especially kids, and I've seen where kids were tested over and over. I remember one client that I had, and she was actually a doctor, and she wanted to have her daughter tested for eggs because her daughter, actually didn't want to have her daughter tested for eggs, but she wanted to have a food sensitivity test just to see if her daughter was sensitive to something. And her daughter would complain about constant stomach aches. And I remember connecting with her after her daughter had the test, and on that test it said that she was sensitive to eggs. And immediately after pulling eggs out of her daughter's diet, she never had any more stomach aches. So that's the power of just pulling foods out of your diet that you might be sensitive to. And I wanted to just go back to milk real quick. A lot of ear infections in children can be traced back to having a milk sensitivity. So if you're having a child that has a lot of ear infections, especially early in years, kids tend to pick up ear infection. You might want to consider taking milk out of their diet and see what happens. You may not have those reoccurring ear infections. The last one is wheat. Now, I'm gluten sensitive. I found out that I was gluten sensitive way before a test, and the way that I knew was that I would always go to work and they would have these things which we would call lunch and learns, and in those lunch and learns they would always cater in cookies and sandwiches. And I remember when I would eat those sandwiches or those cookies, I would immediately get sleepy, and I couldn't understand why I could not stay awake in the meetings. And I know I'd gotten a lot of sleep that night, so why was it that I was not able to stay awake in those meetings? I found out and was able to trace back to wheat. But not only was that it was a double-edged sword for me, because not only was it making me sleepy, but also it was attacking my joints. I was diagnosed with arthritis, I believe, in my 30s. And I did a post on Instagram today about the knee brace that I used to wear when I would play basketball. And I remember listening to a podcast with Sean Croxton, who is kind of my mentor, the person who I started my podcast after. And on that podcast, Sean's no longer doing this podcast now, but on that podcast, he had a man on, a doctor named Dr. William Davis, and he has a book called Wheat Belly. And I remember hearing on that show that sometimes if you are sensitive to gluten, it can attack your joints. And I thought to myself, I said, well, let me try eliminating gluten for 7 days out of my diet. And I eliminated the gluten for 7 days, and what happened was nothing short of miraculous. I had no more knee pain. My arthritis seemed to disappear, and I no longer had to wearing a knee braces, and to this day I don't have any problems with my knees. So that's a testament to paying attention to what's going on in the foods that you're consuming. And a lot of people don't know they're sensitive to these foods because they've been eating them over time and they've developed some type of tolerance for them. But when you pull these out, these 5 foods out, these are most common, but you can be sensitive to anything. I've seen people be sensitive to beef. People can be sensitive to all types of meats. I myself is sensitive to black pepper. So there's all kinds of things that you can be sensitive to. And the thing with all of this is that once you remove these foods from your diet, if you can get a food sensitivity test, but I would start with just an elimination diet. Eliminate these 5 foods from your diet and see how you feel. If you feel any better, you might take one food and put it back in. For instance, you might take soy and put it back in and see if that's the cause of it. Or if you don't feel good with soy, then you might say, hey, you know what, let me continue to pull this out of my diet and not take it anymore. Same thing with corn, the same thing with milk. But you'll never know what you're sensitive to if you don't do some kind of elimination diet. And this is what I would call a poor man's elimination diet, rather than going to take a test, which will cost you about $200 to $300, probably even more than that. Now, the way that you can do this is start just taking things out of your diet over a period of time and see how you feel. And then what you want to do is rotate those foods back into your diet and see how you feel from that point. You start noticing, hey, I put gluten back in my diet. I'm noticing that I'm sniffling after my meals. Or I notice that my joints feel achy. Then you may want to just decide to take wheat or gluten out of your diet altogether. And the same thing for all of these foods that I've listed as well. This can really save you a lot of time, because a lot of the ailments that we have today is because of foods that we're eating. And just because you pull a food out of your diet does not mean you cannot partake in that food ever again. A lot of people who are suffering from food sensitivity have leaky gut. Leaky gut is when foods seep through intestinal lining. They call it intestinal permeability. And what happens when those foods get into the bloodstreams, your antibodies start to attack those foods, and that's why you have that sensitivity to it. But when you start to heal your gut, and it takes time to heal your gut. I remember I just did a podcast going gluten-free with Heather Jacobson, and that's coming up a little bit on the podcast. I think I have one person before her, and then I have to edit hers, and then that'll be coming up. But I remember asking her on the show, how long did it take her to heal her gut? And she said over a year. So I just don't want people to get discouraged about not being able to eat foods if they take them out of their diet. The thing is that you want to remember again that once you pull these foods out of your diet, you want to work on healing your gut. And once you heal the gut, you can then rotate those foods back in. There are certain foods that you may not ever get to eat again. And that's a good thing, because those foods, the foods that you are sensitive to, can lead to different diseases. And you don't want that. But there's some foods that once you take them out of your diet, you start to heal your gut. You can rotate those foods back in and you'll be able to eat those foods. But I'm at the point now where there's certain foods that I just don't want to eat. I'm never going to go back to eating gluten. I've just eliminated corn and also potatoes. If you find out that you're gluten sensitive, a lot of people who have gluten sensitivities have sensitivities to corn and potatoes, and I shared that sensitivity with Heather Jacobson, which I did the podcast on going gluten free, and like I said, that'll be up in a little while. But she shares those same sensitivities. She's noticing that she has issues with corn and also white potatoes. No issues with sweet potatoes, but I do have those issues with white potatoes, so I pull those things out of my diet, and I've noticed a lot less bloating. Another thing I've noticed is just foods that are in the same family. I know bananas and avocados are kind of in that same family, and I've been noticing that I have issues with avocados as well. And then again, avocados are one of those things that people are always telling you are one of those healthy foods. But just because a food is deemed healthy does not mean that food is healthy for you. I'll say that again. Just because that a food is deemed healthy does not mean that that food is healthy for you. Everybody is different. Everybody has different origins. I'm African American. I have my roots in Africa. You might be European. You have your roots in Europe. So everybody's going to be able to eat different foods. The thing here in America is we're all thrown into a hodgepodge, and we think that we can eat almost anything, and there's people who can deal with eating things like beans. There's people who can deal with things like drinking milk, but there's a segment of us who can't deal with those things. So it's up to you to kind of find out what works for your body. And again, taking these things out will heighten your immune system, and once you put them back in, you will notice that these have given you some reaction. It's just the fact that your immune system has been so suppressed over eating these foods over and over again and not knowing that you have a sensitivity to them, that you don't have any intuitiveness about your body. So again, to recap the video, just because someone says that a food is healthy doesn't mean that that food is healthy for you. It's up to you to find out what foods you have sensitivities to, because in a long run, it's going to do the best for you when it comes to getting away from illness, because a lot of these foods that you're eating over time accumulate, and your body starts to not be able to deal with them, and then that's when it triggers the illness. So this has been Darren McDuffie, alias Fat Man, helping you become perfectly healthy and toned and conscious of course. One love, y'all. I'm out.